Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're checking out the new Nvidia GeForce RTX 4090 laptop GPU, which is being positioned as the fastest mobile GPU for gaming. It's been very stagnant in the gaming laptop space for several years now, ever since the launch of Ampere, but with the new RTX 40 series, we're getting a new architecture, new process node, and new levels of performance. The RTX 4090 laptop is a bit of a controversial GPU because despite sharing RTX 4090 branding, this mobile variant has basically nothing in common with the powerful desktop graphics card we reviewed last year. The GPU die, core configuration, clock speeds, memory bandwidth, capacity, and power limit are all substantially lower on the 4090 laptop, yet Nvidia has decided that 4090 branding makes sense here, which is confusing and misleading to everyday customers that don't know the difference. While this is a terrible anti-consumer move by Nvidia, it's not going to be a huge focus of this video. Instead, I'm going to leave it for a big RTX 4090 laptop versus desktop comparison in the future. Spoiler alert, the RTX 4090 desktop demolishes the laptop variant. In this video though, I want to focus on the laptop market and how the new RTX 4090 laptop GPU compares to the previous flagship, the RTX 3080 Ti laptop variant, and see what this means for people buying a brand new gaming laptop in 2023. The RTX 4090 laptop is built using AD103 silicon, continuing what began with the 3080 Ti laptop, where the flagship model gets Nvidia's 103 die, the largest that could feasibly fit into a laptop form factor given constraints to power, size, and cooling. This leaves the 4090 laptop with 9,728 shader units, the same number as the desktop RTX 4080, and several other specs are shared between those two as well, such as the 16GB memory capacity and 256-bit bus. However, to be clear, this is not an RTX 4080 desktop GPU in a laptop. We already established this isn't an RTX 4090, and yeah, it's not at the level of a 4080 either. That's because the RTX 4090 laptop is firstly clocked a lot lower. At its maximum 150 watt power configuration, the 4090 laptop is rated for a 2040 MHz boost clock, 500 MHz lower than the RTX 4080. It also uses just 18 gigabits per second GDDR6 memory instead of the full 22 gigabits per second GDDR6X, mostly to save power as G6X is quite power hungry. Despite this, the 4090 laptop is a substantial upgrade over the 3080 Ti laptop as it brings 31% more CUDA cores, higher clock speeds on both the GPU and memory, and new features enabled by Nvidia's Ada Lovelace architecture. It also moves from Samsung 8N manufacturing to TSMC 4N, which should deliver a substantial uplift in performance per watt, which is of course crucial for laptops. Unfortunately though, Nvidia are continuing to offer multiple power configurations under the exact same name. The RTX 4090 laptop can be configured anywhere from 80 to 150 watts, the lesser power limit coming with a rated boost clock 29% lower than at 150 watts. This is another highly misleading aspect to Nvidia's naming scheme, as a customer tossing up between two RTX 4090 laptops could end up buying one by accident that's substantially slower, as it features, say, an 80 watt TGP instead of the full 150 watts. With such a large power range, really the lower power variants should be given an entirely different name. Throughout this video, we'll be testing the full 150 watt variant with 25 watts of dynamic boost, so it's important to be aware that this is effectively the best performance on offer with the RTX 4090 laptop. If you do get a laptop with, say, a 115 watt limit or 80 watt limit instead, you should expect much worse results than what we are showing here, so be very careful when researching laptops. The test system for this video is the MSI Titan GT77, which aside from the full 150 watt RTX 4090 laptop GPU configuration, also includes an Intel Core i9-13950HX CPU, 64 GB of DDR5 4800 memory, and other features like a 4K 144Hz mini LED display. This is not a laptop review though, so we won't be touching on things like how good the keyboard and display is, but later in the week we are hoping to have a full breakdown of Intel's new 13th gen HX laptop processors to see what they have to offer. Testing today was conducted primarily at 1080p using MS Hybrid mode, which presents the most CPU limited scenario and gives us a look at a worst case performance using this sort of GPU. We also have 1440p results using a display connected directly to the discrete graphics, which gives us a better idea of GPU limited results using either an external display or an increasingly popular mux switch. Later in the video, I'll also be exploring 4K numbers compared to the RTX 3080 Ti laptop. Starting with Watch Dogs Legion at 1440p using ultra settings, we see very impressive performance from the RTX 4090 laptop configuration. This GPU is now capable of a more high refresh rate experience at this resolution, averaging 108 FPS, which represents a 59% performance improvement over the 3080 Ti laptop. That's pretty massive for a generation-on-generation gain at the same 150 watt power limit. It also quite easily defeats other high-end GPUs such as the RTX 3080 and RTX 3070 Ti for laptops. In the same game at 1080p, we are CPU limited here and get basically the same performance as at 1440p. This limits the gain relative to the RTX 3080 Ti, which isn't as CPU limited at this resolution. We end up with just a 26% improvement, which right from the first game tested highlights how important it will be for new 4090 laptops to use displays with resolutions higher than 1080p to get the biggest gains. In Far Cry 6 at 1440p, we see a more modest performance improvement relative to in Watch Dogs Legion. Here the 4090 is still much faster than the 3080 Ti laptop, but we're looking at a 35% improvement, and we did see some CPU limitations in this benchmark. This is further highlighted looking at the 1080p numbers, where the 4090 is barely faster than the 3080 Ti, and that's despite a new generation of CPU coming into play. The 1440p results in Metro Exodus are extremely impressive. Here the 4090 laptop at 150 watts was able to average 155 FPS, enough to max out a 1440p 144Hz display that you might see in a laptop these days. This gave it a 58% lead on the RTX 3080 Ti laptop. Again, that's a massive improvement. The gains in this title at 1080p aren't as solid, but we're still looking at a 35% gen-on-gen performance increase, which is pretty substantial compared to, say, the Turing versus Ampere era, where new RTX 30 laptop GPUs were typically around the 30% faster mark overall. Another strong performance lead is shown for the 4090 laptop in Red Dead Redemption 2. Averaging nearly 130 FPS in this title using high settings puts the 4090 49% ahead of the RTX 3080 Ti laptop at 150 watts. This margin drops to 25% at 1080p, but for those with higher resolution panels, there is no doubting the power of the new RTX 40 GPU option. In Cyberpunk 2077, the RTX 4090 laptop was able to push above 60 FPS on average for the first time using ultra settings without ray tracing or DLSS, and it doesn't just get slightly more than 60 FPS, it averages 92 FPS, which is a whopping 68% faster than the 3080 Ti at 1440p. That's a mind-blowing gain compared to the previous generation. But at 1080p, the numbers are much less impressive, at just a 20% increase gen-on-gen. Cyberpunk can be quite CPU limited at times, and this appears to be the case when we're talking about just 55 watts of available CPU power. Horizon Zero Dawn showcases a 32% performance increase for the 4090 laptop at 1440p over the 3080 Ti laptop, which is similar to the results seen in Far Cry 6 earlier. Not every game sees huge performance uplifts, but it's hard to be disappointed with a 32% gain either. Again, this was the norm for gen-on-gen uplifts from the last couple of generations. At 1080p, we see a 25% performance uplift, which is reasonable and right around the average we saw at that resolution. It's hard to justify the RTX 4090 laptop in Guardians of the Galaxy when not using ray tracing. While it does average an impressive 150 FPS at 1440p, this makes it just 19% faster than the 3080 Ti laptop, which is the weakest result seen so far. And when flicking over to the 1080p numbers, that margin drops to just 9%, indicating the CPU is CPU limited at both 1080p and to a lesser degree 1440p. Forza Horizon 5 was a modest showing for the 4090 laptop, beating the 3080 Ti by 35% at 1440p using ultra settings. This didn't appear to be a CPU limited result though, as the 4090 was also 35% faster at 1080p. The RTX 4090 laptop loves Resident Evil Village, boasting a 227 FPS average at 1440p using max settings in the area we test, enormous levels of performance. That puts it 68% faster than the 3080 Ti, both running at 150 watts, which is a substantial performance per watt increase. At 1080p, the margin between these two GPUs shrunk to 28%, which is certainly not as impressive. In Hitman 3, we also saw huge gains at 1440p to the tune of a 66% increase over the 3080 Ti laptop in a more GPU-limited test scenario using the opening cutscene of the Dubai mission. The performance here is easily sufficient for 1440p 240Hz displays, which is pretty crazy from a laptop. The margin at 1080p between these parts was nowhere near as impressive, just a 15% gain, which appears to be strongly CPU limited at this resolution, even with a Core i9 processor. Of course, these days ray tracing is also important for gaming as more titles integrate support. When looking at Far Cry 6 using maximum settings, the 4090 laptop runs into more of a CPU limit than GPU limit, even at 1440p. Previously, we saw a 35% uplift over the 3080 Ti laptop in this game, but with ray tracing enabled, that margin dropped to 26%, and at 1080p we were even more CPU limited with just an 8% gen-on-gen increase. In some titles, it does appear the 4090 laptop is really pushing the boundaries of what is possible with today's CPUs. Performance gains are much more impressive in Cyberpunk 2077 using ray tracing at 1440p. Here we saw a 68% performance increase over the 3080 Ti laptop, matching the margin without ray tracing enabled in this title. This took the 4090 laptop up to 44 FPS on average, which isn't amazing, but playable after enabling DLSS. The 3080 Ti really didn't cut it in this title, even when upscaling is used. I've also got results at 1080p, which highlight again a whopping 68% performance gain for the 4090 laptop versus 3080 Ti laptop. With ray tracing enabled, this game is not CPU limited at 1080p, and the 4090 gets to flex its muscles, but this is relatively rare at this resolution. Final game we're looking at in depth is Guardians of the Galaxy at 1440p using max ray tracing settings. This game only saw modest improvements for the 4090 laptop running without ray tracing, but with ray tracing enabled, the 4090 was capable of more of a high refresh experience, averaging 105 FPS without upscaling enabled. This is a 62% performance increase compared to the 3080 Ti, much more in line with the results seen in other titles. But when dropping back down to 1080p, the game is more limited by other factors, even with ray tracing enabled, at a 29% increase for these parts. While we showed 13 game configuration benchmarks in detail, I actually collected data from 20 games, so let's take a look at a head-to-head comparison between the RTX 4090 laptop and RTX 3080 Ti laptop across all games, running at 150 to 175 watts for both. At 1440p, the numbers for the RTX 4090 laptop are certainly very impressive. On average, we saw a 48% performance improvement, which is absolutely massive for a single generation in a power-constrained laptop. This has been achieved entirely through a new architecture and new process node. Nvidia was unable to simply push up the power this generation in laptops like they have done on the desktop, but to get a 48% gain despite this is huge. The results do vary somewhat depending on the game and configuration though. There are some hints of CPU limitations using the RTX 4090 laptop even at 1440p. Titles such as Guardians of the Galaxy without ray tracing and Spider-Man Remastered saw gains of less than 20%. But on the flip side, there were some titles that saw increases in excess of 60%, such as Hitman 3, Cyberpunk 2077, and Modern Warfare 2. Ray tracing performance has also increased in line with the gains seen using rasterization, making laptops much more viable for ray-traced gaming. I'll also show the 4K numbers here, which basically remove all CPU limitations across the games benchmarked. At this resolution, the 4090 laptop was 58% faster than the 3080 Ti laptop on average, including large gains in titles that were previously a bit CPU limited. Again, with some titles hitting 70% faster and a minimum uplift of 45%, the 4090 laptop does make 4K gaming on laptops more of a reality. Most titles hit 60 FPS on average at 4K using the 4090 laptop with rasterization. While the 1440p and 4K results are excellent, the RTX 4090 laptop is not as well suited to 1080p gaming. Compared to the 3080 Ti laptop, it's still 29% faster on average across 20 game configurations, but this is half the gain we saw at 4K, and there were several games that weren't even 10% faster. I frequently run into CPU bottlenecks at 1080p with the Core i9-13950HX set to 55 watts. It's just not enough CPU power for this sort of GPU. Generally, I wouldn't recommend buying a 1080p laptop with a 4090, but if you do, it's crucial that the laptop has two extra capabilities. One is a mux switch that allows a direct connection between the display and discrete graphics. The second is the ability to run the CPU with a power limit of at least 75 watts in addition to the GPU running at 150 watts. That's a very high total power requirement, but with those two additions, I was able to improve 1080p performance by a further 13%, and as much as 38% in the most CPU limited titles. I'd certainly say the CPU is much more important with the RTX 40 generation than previously, especially at the high end. There is of course DLSS 3 support as well with the RTX 4090 laptop, and here this feature does seem like a more useful inclusion than with the 4090 desktop card that, well, smashes most games effortlessly. When there is a tendency to be CPU limited, DLSS 3 can generate additional frames and increase visual smoothness, which is great for single player titles that aren't latency sensitive. Spider-Man Remastered is one such game that is very CPU limited on modern laptops and really doesn't benefit much from the extra performance that the 4090 laptop GPU offers outside of 4K. DLSS 3 works well in this scenario and is suited to these sorts of constrained systems. Overall, there is no doubting that the RTX 4090 laptop GPU is extremely powerful and opens up many new possibilities for laptop gaming. With 50 to 60% performance improvements compared to the RTX 3080 Ti laptop GPU in GPU limited scenarios, the new 4090 laptop is perfect for 1440p high refresh rate gaming, as well as ray tracing and even 4K gaming at times, often without needing to touch upscaling at all. This level of performance gain compared to the previous generation is hugely impressive. It's one of the largest I can remember for laptops, and it's doubly so when these gains were seen without any increase to GPU power, something that's not really possible in laptops at the moment. Going from RTX 20 to RTX 30 was about a 30% uplift at the same power limit, and similar for GTX 10 series to RTX 20 series. The RTX 4090 laptop in a best versus best comparison doubled that gen-on-gen increase, which is incredible news for laptop gamers, and all thanks to the new architecture, process tech, and further power optimizations for mobile. It's actually pretty crazy to think that a modern flagship laptop in 2023 will have the rough performance of an RTX 3090, which by today's standards is still a very fast graphics card. The 3090 was a 350 watt GPU. Just 2.5 years later, we're talking about that performance inside 150 to 175 watts. That's just another way to think about the massive performance per watt increase we're seeing this generation. Nvidia complements this performance nicely with a strong feature set. DLSS 2 continues to be the leading upscaling technology that's widely supported in today's games, and DLSS 3 makes more sense for this type of laptop GPU that can run into CPU limitations. On top of that, we get things like Reflex and Nvidia's encoding technology, so it's a very compelling package for mobile gamers. With all of that said, and not taking away from its great performance too much, there are some pretty big negatives here as well. Nvidia continues to mislead and confuse customers with their atrocious laptop GPU naming scheme. While the RTX 4090 laptop does perform similarly to an RTX 3090 desktop card, that doesn't make it an RTX 4090, not even close, as you'll see in an upcoming video. When you're only giving the laptop model 60% of the CUDA cores seen in the desktop card with the exact same name, it just simply should not be called the RTX 4090 for laptops. Find another name, use an M at the end, anything else would be better. This is further compounded by the situation where an 80-watt RTX 4090 and 150-watt RTX 4090 also have the exact same name, when the 80-watt model will be substantially slower. Imagine watching this review and getting all excited about the performance, going out and buying an RTX 4090 laptop, only to find you actually bought one with an 80-watt GPU that performs 30% worse than what we showed here. That would be bitterly disappointing, and again, it could easily be avoided with a more sensible naming scheme. While not so much an issue with the GPU itself, the RTX 4090 laptop is powerful enough that it does frequently run into CPU bottlenecks at 1080p and even 1440p at times, and the laptop I used had a high-end Core i9-13950HX processor inside. I would advise against buying a 4090 laptop with a 1080p display because you just won't get the benefit this GPU has to offer. A mux switch is also essential this generation, as are high CPU power limits and beefy cooling. That does present somewhat of an issue for the RTX 4090 because to access the highest levels of performance, you'll need a laptop with 150 watts of GPU power and likely 75 watts or more of CPU power. That's over 200 watts of combined power and heat to dissipate, which really isn't feasible for most laptop designs. Only the biggest and heaviest systems can support that level of power, which takes away from the portability of getting a mobile gaming system. I mean, look at the power brick for the MSI Titan GT77. It's absolutely enormous, which you have to carry around in addition to the large laptop itself. The final issue I have is a big one and an inescapable roadblock, and that's the price. RTX 4090 laptops are disgustingly expensive. The GT77 used in this video is a $5,000 US laptop. That's right, $5,000. The absolute cheapest model currently listed on Newegg is the Gigabyte Aura 17X for $3,500 US, which is still just insanely expensive for a gaming laptop and makes it hard to justify under any condition. For example, here is a high-end desktop that I spec'd out over on PC Part Picker. It includes the Core i9-13900K, an RTX 4090 from MSI, plenty of memory and storage, good cooling, really the works. This is an incredible gaming machine, and because it has a desktop Core i9 and desktop RTX 4090, it blows away the laptop Core i9 and RTX 4090 in performance. It's priced as shown here at $3,500 US, and I wasn't exactly choosing bang for buck components. The same price as the cheapest RTX 4090 laptop. It seems clear to me that part of the reason why Nvidia has named this GPU the RTX 4090 is to allow OEMs to give it price parity with similar desktop configurations. To someone that hasn't done the research, you'd be looking at an RTX 4090 Core i9 desktop for $3,500 or an RTX 4090 Core i9 laptop for $3,500 and thinking, well, they are roughly the same. Why not get the laptop? It's portable, comes with a screen. Surely the same component names and price means I'm getting the same thing, right? Well, this obviously isn't the case and is why the prices for these laptops feel absurdly expensive. It's further complicated by the 4090 laptop designs, as I said before, just not being that portable. We're talking about 16-inch screens or more likely 17 to 18-inch screens, weighing 3 kilos or more with the power brick. It only makes sense to buy a laptop if you are frequently moving it from place to place. But with a large and heavy system, and I haven't even shown, look, there's the back of the system there, how often are you going to be doing that? If it's just sitting in one spot all the time, you are much better off in this sort of price class buying a proper desktop. It'll be much faster at the same price or cheaper for the same performance and will be fully upgradable to new components in the future. This kind of relegates RTX 4090 laptops to a really niche use case. I just don't think these huge power-hungry laptops make much sense at all. The pricing issues are further highlighted comparing these prices to last-gen prices. Nvidia announced the 3080 Ti laptop GPU is starting in $2,500 US laptops, and these days you're looking at spending about $2,300 US at the lowest. That means the cheapest RTX 4090 configurations will be offering about 50 to 60% more gaming performance in GPU limited scenarios at about a 50% higher price. Yes, there's a huge generational leap in performance, but it's hard to get that excited about when it doesn't come with a price to performance improvement. You're just faced with spending more money in line with the speed increase. This whole situation is so disappointing because the performance on offer is excellent. The hardware is clearly very good. It's fast, it's efficient, and it is very impressive. But in this size of laptop and the absurd prices we're looking at, it's hard to recommend. It really has to be cheaper, and with demand for consumer PCs falling substantially in the last few months, I think it'll be tough to sell these laptops in any significant numbers. Anyway, that's it for this look at the RTX 4090 laptop GPU. Coming up very shortly will be a comparison between this very laptop here and a gaming PC with the RTX 4090. So if you're interested in the real differences between 4090 laptop and desktop, check out that video coming soon. We'll also be looking at the 13th gen Core i9 processor in this particular laptop, which itself is actually very impressive as well. So stay tuned for that also on the channel in hopefully a couple of days from now. And before I forget, we also have our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. If you like this sort of independent testing, please do consider supporting us. Links are in the description below. You gain access to things like our Discord community, monthly live streams, and all sorts of good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.